I get these calls, as I said earlier. My co-founder left and he has half the company. What do I do? It's like, what do you do? You got to, get a beer, sit down with them, and presumably say, hey, look, we're trying to raise money. You got a little piece of the pie. Let's just hopefully settle up and pay them and get rid, that way. Is that necessarily amenable, where you can just pay them off and to have them disappear, or are they?
Structure it so you pay them out of the proceeds if you get funding, and what if you don't have any cash to buy them out?
Yeah, so that's one of the things you could propose. I think you have to be transparent with the VC and just say, look, we ended up having too many co-founders. This guy now has whatever 2-3%. Part of the proceeds that we get, we want to sort of cash them out. They're not going to be too happy about cash going out the door, but on the other hand, you're cleaning up the cap table, so that's a good thing. Yeah, I mean, the co-founder issue, and again, I was going to try to discuss that next week. That's what often happens. You start, ideally it's 2. 2 is the magic number, folks, 2. Particularly in a tech company, it's the hacker and the hustler. That's what they call them. One guy or gal is doing the coding, and the other is the hustler who does, the sort of this, think of Steve Jobs and Wozniak. 2 is the magic number. What's better than 2? Nothing, okay? And because you're going to be in the trenches, I mean, all the experts talk about it. I'm not an expert in this area. Paul Graham is. They all say the same thing. You're going to run into roadblocks. Techstars and Y Combinator all require 2, my understanding, because things get tough. I mean, no matter how good you are, no matter how many things, how things are going to get really rough. And so it's hard to do it by yourself. It just is, And so 3, 4, I mean, once you start getting these kinds of numbers, you're just diluting. Think about it. 5 guys, it could be 20% or whatever, however it's split up, but it's just too much. Because then angel investment comes in, there's your first dilution. Then VC, before you know it, I mean, everyone's down to like 6%. So that might have happened in your situation. So the mistake is having too many co-founders. That's not a legal issue, that's a business issue. Sometimes it works out, like in PayPal, but generally you want to focus on 2. Maybe 3, maybe 1, but 2 is the best. Every situation is different. If you don't have the money, it depends if this guy, what kind of relationship you have with him. Is it sometimes things get a little bit, unfortunately, acrimonious, and parties don't want a deal, and screw you, and leave me alone, and they kind of play hostage. But usually if you sit down with a beer and explain, look, we just want to buy you out, that could work. Yeah, there are ways around it of restructuring. I mean, that can get tricky and expensive also in terms of setting up new entities. There's a concept. For that reason, this is what the VC guys build in this concept called drag-along rights. So sometimes, I used to do a lot of M&A work, and you have these sort of stragglers, 1 or 2 or 3%. And it's very important to have in the documents what's called a drag-along right. So if a company is buying all the equity, they want 100%, right? They don't want. So the majority person can force them to sell their shares. It's called a drag-along right. So there's sometimes you can get things like that built into documents, but that's why we go back to choosing your co-founder is so important, because if it's someone you know and trust really well, it's a good friend, you wouldn't necessarily want to be in this situation. I mean, it happens from time to time, but that's the problem with more than 2, and then people you don't know. This ton of stuff pops up. Any other questions? Yeah.
Would the vesting schedule be the right place to address the event of one of the co-founders passing away? Because how do you decide what happens if, let's say him and I are in a,
Yeah, that's in the restricted stock purchase agreement, right? So that's what lawyers do in these documents. It's like they're coming up with every possible scenario, divorce, death, and that's why, these documents sometimes can be lengthy, because if you don't address the issue now, what happens? And then, no one knows, right? And so that would be an issue that would indeed be addressed as part of, I think the shares would probably go to his estate, or there may be a right of repurchase. Sometimes you build that in, so you don't necessarily want the estate. Or divorce is a good example. In California, I think it's community property, so you don't want to have this guy's ex-wife be your new partner. So you get tricky issues there. So anyway, you guys have been great. I mean, this is a lot of information. Yeah, thanks a lot. That's great. Hey.
We had over 4,000 people watching online.
Come on.
So
that's cool.
That's awesome.
Good job.
All right.
That's because of you. You're the marketing wizard.
Well,
what's up, man?
We'll go ahead and we'll break. We have the pizza and the beer in the back, also soda for those of you who do not want any alcohol. But once again, let's give a big round of applause to Scott.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, man. Well, thank you. That was great. You scrambled, man. That's cool. You should use a mentor.